I must admit, listening to the earlier two presentations, I felt like I should pack up and go home after the first one. You know, the market doesn't look to be there, etc., etc. But I was given hope by listening to Sushi that Japan are also still in the market and interested in FLNG, so maybe we will have this conference next year as well. But I certainly would like to go through what we're doing in the realm of small-scale FLNG and also take you through a little bit of the journey that Hoegh has had over the last 6 years or so in the FLNG space, as well as some of our other things that we've been up to. And you see the photo there of the FSRU in Lithuania, which went into production end of last year. Appropriately named Independence, and we're rather pleased with that. Basically, it gave Lithuania a supply of energy which wasn't dependent on Russia, and it's been quite a flagship for them. Okay, just moving on to what I'd like to outline. I'd go through how we go about succeeding with our FLNG projects, how we view risk, and how we are guaranteeing performance. And also put FLNG into the bigger picture of project viability. I've just got to push the right button here. Yep. The usual disclaimer, basically don't believe anything I tell you, but we'll move on from that one because I don't think you really want to read it. But no, you can believe things I tell you, I'm only joking. Okay, I'd like to just give you a little bit of background as to Hoegh and its business model and activities. Basically, we are sometimes called a ship owner. We're actually not that. We prefer to be seen as a provider of floating LNG infrastructure services on long-term contract basis. We've currently got 9 LNGCs, FSRUs in operation. 3 are currently on order, and we've contracted our latest FSRU about 3 weeks ago, and that's the 6th FSRU that we've placed with HHI over the last 4 years. The most recent startup was the Hoegh Gallant, now operating in Ain Sokna in Egypt, and I listened yesterday with quite interest to the presentation on the conversion aspects and the costs and schedule associated with conversion for FSRUs. I think it's worth pointing out that this particular project, we put that regas vessel into operation 6 months after signing the contract. That's basically because we have a vessel on spec, permanently in construction, essentially ordered on spec, which enables us to react quite quickly to any market or inquiry. The other thing that I think is worth pointing out is our latest vessel is capable of regassing something like 750 million scuffs a day. This is currently in the yard, and the cost is around about the $300 million mark. And I looked at some of the data that was presented yesterday. I don't know where it came from, but it certainly didn't come from us. I guess we're all here because we have an interest in FLNG projects, and we have different roles in those projects. Hoegh's role is to build, own, and operate FLNG units. We are a long-term partner in those projects. We are the company that has to perform through the whole lifetime of the project, the company which local communities will see as long as the unit is there. And to us, that means the capacity holders and investors have to have confidence in our ability to deliver and operate in a safe and reliable way. So the important question that we usually put to most of our the people we're talking to is, do you want to be associated with Hoegh? Because when we get into a project, we're going to be there for the long term, for many years. The contracts that we look to sign are probably going to be a minimum of 10 years, ideally 15 to 20 years. Basically, to commit to that, we need to be very strongly involved in the upfront project development, and we've invested a lot of time and resources into building a strong team, both technically, commercially, execution-wise, and operations are all already in our group at the pre-feed stage. We also have a contracting strategy which basically relies on a single main EPCIC contractor able to deliver the FLNG solution. We've done a lot of studies over the last few years. We probably kicked off on the first generic FPSO nearly 7 years ago. Ron Viss mentioned it yesterday in his presentation from CB&I. Since then, we've either funded ourselves or through various clients performed a large number of studies, both the full offshore solutions ranging from 2 to 3 million tons per annum, jetty moored, turret moored, tower yoke moored, etc. And now we're working with we have worked with the main EPC contractors in the world, and mainly with 3 of them over the last few years. And it's important for us that we have a reliable partner with a strong EPCIC reputation in our engineering as our engineering contractor. In that journey, we've moved very much from the offshore, full-scale offshore, harsh environment type concept, and we've now moved to the small-scale, near-shore FLNG barge type concept, which is where we're focused today. It's been a long journey in a way. It's been quite painful at times. We started out looking at the offshore solutions. We learnt a lot. We basically positioned or were looking at processing essentially gas directly coming from the offshore subsea reservoirs. As we went through all that, we saw the cost and complexity increasing quite significantly beyond our initial expectations. And for a company the size of Hoegh, it simply started to move out of the realms of possibility from a financial and commercial perspective. So we refocused, and the last 2 to 3 years we've looked at nearshore barge-based solutions designed largely to treat and liquefy a pipeline specification gas. We call it the bite-sized solution. We're pretty busy at the moment in North America on a number of projects, but we see ourselves competing with some of those onshore Gulf of Mexico liquefaction projects. Why nearshore? I think it's worth and why around 2 MTPA is our ideal sweet spot in terms of production capacity. It varies around that number, but depending on gas composition and a couple of other details. But generally, we're looking around about the 2 MTPA, though we can, with one train or smaller trains, deliver down to 1 MTPA. Several reasons for this. Largely with 2 MTPA capacity, you limit the number of capacity holders that you need for your offtake to 1 or 2. And that certainly simplifies the whole, the number of contracts that you need to get in place and the number of people that you have to keep happy. We like to keep it simple. The other side of it is the CapEx requirements. Whilst there's still a lot of money, they're manageable, and they're certainly within Hoegh's capability to finance. The other thing that we can do with this is we get the full EPCIC contractor wrap on the contracts, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And from looking at the market and the opportunities that are available, we see many applications and the opportunity to repeat the construction and, as time goes on, economise on the overall capex. Just looking more closely at our business model, we've presented this many times before, but as a service provider, we're not involved in the commodity trading. We're happy to own, operate FLNG and the associated infrastructure, but we don't take upstream risk and we don't take downstream risk. So we're really a service provider, and in that slide there you just see very simple representation of the model that we're basically applying. I'd like to talk a little bit about project viability. When we're looking at a potential project, we need to look at the overall viability, and I think others have talked about this, or various parts of this, but what is it that takes an effort, what is it that is required to bring an FLNG project together? The overviews here, we like to say that the FLNG unit is the heart of the project, and that might be true, but it's the performance of the whole system that delivers the value. And if one part of the system breaks down, well, it doesn't help you at all. You create nothing. I've got some nice words that I wrote here, but I don't think I'll use them. But you've got to see the whole thing as a chain, and looking at FLNG on its own doesn't really work. And certainly the last year or so, we've put as much effort into talking to off-takers as we have chasing opportunities, because if you haven't got the off-taker at the end of the day, you haven't got a project. And just digging down into that a little bit more carefully, and certainly reflecting on what off-takers are looking to see, there are a number of elements that contribute to that whole project viability, and we've heard it in this conference, and we're sick and tired, quite frankly, of hearing it from a number of people who talk about, we can do FLNG for $600, $500, $700 a tonne. That's only part of the story, and it's really a very misleading number that's being bandied around, and quite frankly, I think a number of consultants have been using it, and it really doesn't tell you the proper story at all. We don't like the idea of dollars per tonne. It doesn't give you the right picture, and what's important is what is the price that you can deliver your project's LNG to the off-taker. And there are a whole number of elements and pieces in that puzzle that need to be put together. Quite frankly, we see ourselves in some of the projects that we are involved in being more competitive in delivery to Japan than current Gulf of Mexico projects. The other thing that needs to happen when you're trying to sell these projects is to give the off-takers confidence in your ability to actually deliver at that price that you're forecasting. I'd like to just touch on the typical sort of guarantees that you'd see in most EPCIC type contracts. So if we focus on the actual contract guarantee structure for the FLNG unit itself. Typical structure is, as I've shown here, in very simple terms. Subcontractors offer a guarantee to your main contractor, the main contractor passes that on to the service provider. And the funding providers look at that, they want their performance guarantees, their completion guarantees. And we as a client or a service provider, we also require our technical guarantees as well to make sure that the risks that we're taking are also properly covered. What we are doing in terms of the commercials, the commercial structures that we're putting around here, is we are signing up a lease rate at the end of feed. So basically prior to FID, we will sign up a lease rate with a customer, and that would be it. We carry the risk from then on. So basically, what we need to do is then make sure that those risks are properly identified and allocated within our contracting structure. So this is where we get into the wrap, if you like, as we like to call it. We need a clear definition of which guarantees are going to be provided from who, and also that we have one main contractor that puts all of that together. So in other words, a subcontractor's guarantee flowing through to us may be for his particular piece of supply, but it's not, we don't want to have to, if the whole thing doesn't work, we can't rely on a subcontractor's limit of liability. We've got to have a much larger limit of liability than that. So basically the main contractor that we're working with is picking up all those subcontractors' guarantees and then placing a whole wrap equal to the total value of those guarantees plus more. So within that whole framework, we have not only the performance, the general contract guarantees, but also the technical performance guarantees. These include production capacity, the production per unit, the LNG quality that's produced, the specific power that's being used, your overall fuel consumption, transfer rates, refrigerant, and availability. And that requires measurement, over the most likely the first 2 to 3 years of the contract. So you can imagine, with a lot of contracts, if they're delivered X yard, the sail away date is where those contract guarantees are pretty well finished, and you get a little bit of, you get a certain amount of warranty work on top. What we're looking at is a much more extensive guarantee period, and we're currently working that through with our main engineering contractor. One of the key issues is essentially within all that, who is taking what risk and how is that risk being allocated, and is the party that you've allocated it to capable of handling that risk? So in order to answer that, you essentially need to understand what the risks are, have a party that can actually manage and rectify those risks, and that all boils down to a pretty solid contracting strategy from day one. Great deal of diligence in how you go about it, and doing quality engineering and assurance. And from that point of view, the rush to try and be faster than anybody else, the rush to try and get to an FID and be in production without doing your front-end engineering properly. If there's one thing we learned from the FPSO experience, and we talked about it yesterday, it's do your front end right and really make sure you've worked all of that through absolutely thoroughly. So that's really where we are on our whole approach to the engineering. We've been put under pressure to do to complete a feed, move into FID under record time, and we've just turned around and said no, we're not doing it. Do the work properly, because it will ultimately pay off in value. So, to summarise, our approach is what we call bite-sized FLNG solution. It's a robust but relatively simple guarantee structure that we're seeking and we are negotiating at this moment in time. It covers both commercial and performance risk of the contract, and we're basically doing that because we're part of the project on a long-term basis. We don't see ourselves as an EPC contractor. We don't intend to build and operate for a couple of years and then let the client buy the facility. No, we're going to be there for the long term. It makes commercial sense for us to operate in the realm of 2 million tonnes or so. We're looking a little bit more on some projects and a little bit less on others, but broadly around the 2 million tonnes per annum. We can afford to finance that, and we're comfortable in the operation as well. We've got technical competence. We've built a very strong team. We're largely most of us have got experience with major oil companies, and we're looking forward to the market sort of waking up and realising that FLNG and certainly the barge-based nearshore solutions can offer certainly offer a competitive solution to the things we see going on at the moment in the USA, the onshore plants. We believe that nearshore barge-based LNG can compete very well with those, and we've got a number of projects currently in the pipeline, which we certainly hope we'll see an FID within the next couple of years. So with that, I'll take questions. I know I've rushed through it a little bit, and I probably was a bit quicker than I needed to be, but happy to
Thanks,
answer
Duncan.
any questions.
Questions for Duncan?
One over there.
Nikolai Grigoriev, Gazprom. Duncan, thanks a lot for a great presentation. First of all, let me refer to your very first slide where you showed an FSRU in Lithuania. Just to remind that last month we ordered our own FSRU to station in Kaliningrad, which is an enclave sandwiched between Lithuania and Poland, with the sole purpose to ensure independence of gas supply from Lithuania. And since the name has already been taken, we are struggling to find an apt name, so your suggestions are highly appreciated. On a serious note, the question is about conversions. It was covered extensively yesterday. It would be quite interesting to hear your view in general on the technical and commercial implications of converting a 1970s built Moss tanker, and specifically whether you think your main competitor, Golar, will be successful in West Africa, whether you expect delays, overruns, and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Okay, well, first of all, when it comes to commenting on competitors, I will do it privately and not in public. So I'm afraid I can't answer the second part of your question, but we can, over a cup of tea, have a discussion about it. As far as we're concerned, we're not doing conversions, and that's a policy decision that we made probably 7 years ago. We did our initial, the very first studies we did, we looked at converting Moss tanker for FLNG. We concluded at that time that we didn't want to do it. We're looking generally at 15 to 20 years life, and we made a policy decision that we were going to go new build. And we've done that with all the FSRUs and also with with FLNG. Will we change that position? We have no intention at the moment. And cost-wise, I've had a lot of experience on FPSOs and FPSO conversions, and the thing about conversions is you never actually, it's like building an old car. If you ever restored a car, I mean, it's a great similarity. You actually don't know what it's going to cost until you start doing it, and then it costs a lot more than you ever thought. And I see the same risks essentially associated with conversions. So, we'll wait and see how things go. I think on the face of it, conversions can offer a lower capex cost, but you've got to balance that with the OPEX, the inefficiency of the older systems that are on those vessels, and the integration of marine systems that weren't really designed to support the topsides and are not necessarily integrated with the topsides. So, we don't have a view as to whether they'll be better or worse in the longer term, but we've just made a conscious decision to go with new build.
Who's next? Okay, I'll give you a bit time to think about the next question. I have a question. Going back to your guarantee picture, when it comes to, so the construction, technical and contractual, that's clear to me. When it comes to the operational part, in general, Hoegh's plan is to provide all operations staff yourself, or would you bring in or outsource operations of these units as well?
We will have a number of our own people, our own staff people operating, but we also have an operations contractor and we have that operations contractor involved now in the front-end planning. Longer term, it really depends on the project, but certainly our operations contractor at the moment, and for the projects, for a couple of projects that we've been involved in, it was our intention to largely utilise their expertise for the first 5 to 10 years of operation, and in time determine whether we want to build up our own operations organisation. But at the moment, we're looking towards outsourcing the operation as such, except for the marine side, which we basically have our own ships captains and marine people in-house.
Do you see from your clients pressure for so-called local content, i.e. that they in future would want to be involved in operations?
Not really. The clients we're dealing with, we see that they really want to keep the FLNG almost at an arm's length, put all the risk onto us. In fact, we're carrying, in one project, we're carrying not only the risk of the performance of the FLNG, but also the risk of the performance of the infrastructure, the onshore infrastructure as well. And on another project, basically we're picking everything up from the end of the pipeline and carrying that risk. So, I should mention, we've moved now to dealing largely with pipeline gas, processing pipeline gas. That's why I say we can be competitive with the projects in the Gulf of Mexico, which are also doing pipeline gas. But they've got a slight advantage in that generally they're on sites that were originally permitted as import terminals, so some of the infrastructure is already there, whereas we're working on a couple of greenfield sites.
If there are no questions, there is. This is Norway.
I know, yeah. I wonder if it's a Dorothy
Hoegh,
Dixon.
in being a big, large shipper of LNG, have you seen any merits in combining the liquefaction and the transportation?
Yes, we'd love to do that, obviously, but we're keeping it relatively separate at the moment. I mean, we see ourselves in the FLNG space as really being that FLNG service provider, but obviously once we're engaged with a client, we'd love to do the transport as well. We've got the capacity to do the transport, but to be quite honest, our real focus on the business at the moment is, the LNG shipping business is a very competitive space at the moment, and as you probably know, there's, I don't know, something like 60 LNGCs without a contract at the moment. There's a surplus, and so we've really focused on the regas, which has been very successful for us, and the FLNG, which to a certain extent is still very much an investment for us. But fortunately, regas has been so buoyant that we're still getting funding to keep spending the money we're spending. But we're making progress. I would say we're making much more realistic progress now than we were previously. When we were looking at the offshore, the full offshore solutions and trying to essentially compete with a Prelude, we were really in the wrong space. And now we're very much in the right place, and I'm very confident we're going to be successful.
Next question. Can you say?
Yeah.
Sorry, where was that?
Small question. Are you also looking at some Chinese yards for future potential conversion, new builds for the FSRUs?
Yeah, we're actually in discussion with a large number of yards through our EPCIC contractor. A lot of it comes down to whether you use internal storage or whether you use an FSO as storage. Once you go to internal storage, at the moment you've got to look at the yards capable of providing membrane tanks and the ones licensed to do that. But our execution model, we're completely open at the moment. We're discussing we're discussing with both Korean yards, but also we've got Chinese, Thai, other yards in mind as well. And essentially it will move, it will depend on project, it will go from project to project, client preferences, and ultimately the economics associated with it. But generally speaking, we prefer, our preferred model at the moment is to go with minimal buffer storage in the hull of the FLNG and use an FSO as the main storage. But in some cases where you have limited jetty space, for instance, and you want to expand, because one of the beauties of the 2 million tonne per annum facility is that you can essentially put a 2 million tonne barge in initially, and then once that's all up and running, you can go with a second 2 million tonne barge, and quite frankly, the cost of doing that compared to going with a larger 4 million tonne per annum barge is very similar. And you've reduced your project complexity, you've got much easier financing arrangements, etc., etc. But depending on jetty length, you may be limited on being able to provide an FSO as well as the barges. So it really is horses for courses, and we're completely open at the moment. We're talking to a large number of yards on how we would work together with our engineering contractor.
Who's next? It looks like you have progressed also in your thinking on technology selection. Can you say a few words?
Yep, we're basically using a chart package plant, essentially nominally 1 million tonnes per annum per train. We're looking at using, we haven't finally decided, but we're looking at using either Trent 60s or LM 6000 PF Plus as the main drivers, which is a bit of a step out for in terms of that capacity associated with those with the chart technology. But the chart package technology is where we've moved to. We've looked at DMR, we've looked at niche, we've looked at SMR, various other SMRs, but we've moved now to very much the packaged arrangement. And again, that's part and parcel because of a very strong relationship between our engineering contractor and chart.